Hello, welcome to Digital Loop, Season 2, Episode 16. The episode without a guest for once. Me and Ivan where, in the Digital Loop, when we do, people kind of wonder how we find topics. And sometimes we look at the news, sometimes we have long-running topics in our heads, sometimes we have a lack of ideas. So what we do, we have this document that we share. We use all the digital tools that we keep talking about, and we have a huge document with a lot of themes, and we put articles that could be interesting to one day. And there was this article that's been staying there, and I think Ivan found it a few months ago that I'm going to quote right now. The reason I'm saying that is that this week there was, or was it maybe now last week, because of course the news goes very fast. If you were not hiding under a rock, or at least if you were following a little bit what happens, there was this New York Times report that was leaked by BuzzFeed. It's a state of how the New York Times is doing in this digital world, and we'll go to that in a minute. But I wanted to quote first that article that says, and it will be linked after the show on the website. The name of the article is "Hello Responsive, Goodbye Digital." And the first, and I'm sorry to quote, the first paragraph is very interesting, talking about digital transformation and how organization have to change their ways to become more digital. So I'm going to quote, "The ways that organizations operate and the ways that their employees and customers live has become so infused with digital technology that digital no longer has any useful meaning as a unique expertise or function. The most significant result of this shift, however, is not semantic, but rather that this ubiquitous adoption of digital technology has enabled an exponential increase in the pace of change. Welcome to what he calls the era of responsive organization. Today's most successful business begin by taking the central role of digital technology as a given and create their advantage by being the fastest organization to sense disruption in their market, adapt, and respond." This is something that Ivan and myself have been talking about, of course, a lot, and I found that this is very key. I mean, digital is a given. And I'm going to say hi to Ivan, thinking about, do you think that digital is a given? Hi, Ivan.
Hi, Paul. I agree. This is interesting. I totally agree with this article, and I totally agree with the author of this article, which I think is outstanding, and I definitely recommend it for everybody to read it. But the reality is it's a little bit different. Like, yes, I believe that the term digital, it's in a way meaningless. One of the things that I often tell to my clients is like, okay, what's the difference between strategies and digital strategies? There's no difference. But yet, in today's reality, many organizations that are not yet ready and they are not still aware of this, they are still making the difference between traditional and digital. So yes, in one way, the world is changing, and digital is a constant part of our lives, and it should not be differentiated, because that's, as we always say, digital is not a medium, but it's the era we're in. Everything is digital. We are digital. Yet, at many organizations, they are still not able to cope with this new reality. So yes, it makes sense that term digital is meaningless, but on the other hand, many organizations are still not there yet.
I think that's a bit what he meant. So I'm going to still mention his name because, of course, it wouldn't be very polite not to do so. Mike Arbaz is he works at Undercurrent. You should actually check it out. Again, the link will be on the page. But what I found damning in this New York Times report, it's an internal report talking about the state of the New York Times, and how the New York Times is adapting. It's a print business. They sell newspapers, and of course they have a very, very large organization also catered to digital. You can actually find, of course, the New York Times everywhere from your tablet to the web. But there were in that report, there's a lot of very interesting information. Not only because if you're interested or not about the New York Times itself, but about how the struggles that any companies have to go to become digital, especially incumbents, and by that I mean a company that's traditionally not been a digital company, and it has to move from one to another. And there's actually one sentence that I've highlighted here in the report that says, "We are not moving with enough urgency," which comes back to the quote I just quoted before, is that there's the era, it's moving anyway, and if you're not adapting, you have the risk of being either irrelevant or even going out of business. So the New York Times is not going out of business, obviously. But it's interesting to see that there are a few graphics in this report, and again, I think it's a very interesting one to read if you have any interest in understanding this digital transformation, how an organization can transform itself into being into adapting to this digital era, as Ivan just said. And it's amazing. One of the one of the main revenues for the New York Times, so the subscription, and there's obviously advertising. And in advertising, I think there's like 75% of the revenues still come from print, from the newspapers that you receive at home or you buy at the stand. And so this is really you can feel that. And you can feel that report that people have not come to completely to the realization that the world was moving. There's even one thing that is even that surfaces in that report that is a bit crazy, is that that the kind of qualities, the kind of skills that you need to have are not exactly the same. There are some management skills and others that are shared, whether you're talking about the traditional business or digital. And again, I'm making here traditional versus digital. I believe they are one and the same. Like Ivan just said, I'm making this artificial differentiation to explain that you might still think that you are traditional and you're not a digital company. So the skill sets are, some of them are similar, but obviously some of them, like having people that are able to code for an app, that create responsive design, that actually create the design of both the applications and the web. Also information architecture, meaning how you display the information on the screen. There are similarities between how you display information on a newspaper, because it's a page basically, and how you put it on a web. But of course, there's various differences. And what is damning in that report, and you can feel all throughout it, that the people that have been working in the traditional business do not really want to talk with the people that are creating this new initiative. There's just this, especially you can feel that journalists do not want to talk to engineers or even social media people. So this is where you see the struggle. This is, it's one thing to say, oh, we're going to have initiatives, digital initiatives, going to try stuff, and the New York Times tries a lot. And then you see this huge clash, or maybe even an absence of clash, because they don't even talk to each other. So that's one of the biggest issues, right, Ivan?
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things that I think are important to highlight. One is everything comes down to change. Change is imminent. Change is scary. People like to avoid change, but change is a crucial part of development. Quoting the article from that we mentioned before, the reality today is that now the difference between winners and losers is the difference between who is able to change faster. And one of the things that he mentions, I'm quoting here, is it requires to change faster. It requires to completely rethink of how you operate and how you are organized. And this is very, very, very well described in this report by the New York Times, because one of the things that you can see, there is a lot of areas where at least they are aware that they need to change. The second thing that I wanted to mention is Dave Armano from Edelman Digital. He wrote a very, very good, short, kind of like analysis of the key points that he took from this report. And he focused on 4 areas. They are agility, culture, customer centricity, and talent. And basically what he focused on is, in this report, the New York Times goes through all these areas in which they need to really change. And talking about agility, they need to increase their rate of experimentation. They need to start testing more. They need to start learning from all the data they are getting, and they need to be able to react faster. Talking about culture, I think this is the key element of the key problem here, that again, there is this difference between traditional and digital, and what they are talking about is about this concept of digital first, understanding that this is a digital era and that they should focus first on that and then move on, not the other way around. Talking about employees, this big division between the traditional and the digital, between the engineers and the editors. Third thing is customer centricity, focus on the data, focus on the insights of their users and of their readers, and the fact that they are divided still in business silos, which is not relevant to the realities of today's world. And the last element is talent. The fact that they need to focus on retention, they need to focus on grooming new talent, and the fact that they need to develop digital leadership, meaning they need to really focus on getting digital at all levels of the organizations, not just across different silos. This is one of the first things that I always do when I advise to my clients, that digital is not just for the 4 or 5 guys that get it, that's, you know, they are seated in the corner in a dark room, but this is for everybody at all levels of the organization, meaning from all the way to the top to all the way to the bottom. Because it's really frustrating when you talk with, you know, executives and they're like, yes, we get it, we understand, but our boss, you know, he's old school, so we are not doing anything because he doesn't like it. And this is a reality today. This is happening here and now.
You mentioned culture, and I think this is a bit what I was hinting at when I talk about, you know, these generations. And I think generation is not age, but these two types of people not talking to each other is a culture. I think you know, processes in any organization, or the attitudes of people, the corporate culture, if you want to use another word, it becomes, at some point, it becomes embedded in the organization. I mean, if you create an organization, and New York Times probably did, it was very successful. It's a newspaper of record in the United States. It's a very well seen and very well regarded, very well respected organization. So all the processes and all this culture became completely embedded and part of the DNA of the organization. And suddenly this change. And how can you actually alter your own DNA? That's basically the question. And it is very hard. I mean, Ivan and I are not doing here finger pointing and say, ha, 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 the New York Times, you're actually screwing completely. No, it is something that is actually very hard to do. And New York Times is struggling in that. But you can see, and again, if I come back to the report, you can see some stuff that you can feel like, you know, the New York Times has been putting up a paywall. So basically, after a number of articles, I think it's 10, I'm a subscriber, so that's why I don't remember if it's 10 actually currently, but you have to pay to get access to the articles. And what you see when you read the report is not that they made this in order for people like me that are not subscribers to the New York Times to actually read the New York Times. No, the idea was more to keep being able to sell the print newspaper, to keep basically to keep that user base, because basically if you look at the pricing, I'm not going to go very far that, but it's actually less expensive to pay for digital if you already have the print newspaper. That's for someone like me that is a new customer, that was a new customer at least, and I wants to read the New York Times. So the mindset, it still said, okay, we need, and I mentioned the numbers before, we need to sell advertising on print, we need to sell the print newspapers and to deliver at your home, and on top of that we have digital, by the way, and you can pay for digital because we don't need to lose money on our website and we need to run the operations. I'm a bit harsh when I say that. It's not as clear cut and not as simple, but this is where you see that when a traditional part of your business still makes a lot of sense, and especially it's embedded in the DNA of the organization, you have a hard time moving and understanding the digital era and how people react and how people get the news. Another thing that is also very interesting, this is a bit more news centric, but there was one graph, a chart that kept coming in all the articles referencing this story about the New York Times, is that the readership is going down. I mean, we know that readership is going down on print, but actually the readership even online is not doing that well with the New York Times. And this is also because of the nature of the news, the nature of information. I'm not even talking about news here, information. When Ivan and I, or whoever, maybe you as well, you actually read about news, compared to 5 years ago, and I'm not talking 30 years ago, but compared to 5 years ago, you get a lot of information that's pushed to you. So basically, you get you're on Facebook, and so you see an article. You're on Twitter, you see an article. The information kind of comes to you. So it's not a search base. So you don't have always the intent to find information, but that information comes to you, meaning that you don't need to have the same type of destination to look for that information. It's not like I'm going to go to NewYorkTimes.com and read the newspaper. So obviously then the readership goes down, and the old advertising idea has to be changed, but they don't. I mean, of course, advertising happens on the page. So it's interesting. It's again, it is to show that the nature of information is very circular on digital. You know, it goes around. People are sharing. People are talking to each other with bits of information they find. It's being remixed. You can, I don't know, maybe Tumblr or Twitter. People are quoting stuff, and it goes remixed. People blog about it. I mean, all the articles we've seen this week, Ivan and I were researching for that show. So the nature of information completely changes with digital, and that's basically the same thing that happens to brand. You know, you don't control the brand as much as you used to, because information about your brand and how people talk about your brand, which is again information, is somewhat, not always completely, but out of your control. You have some. You can give some hints to which direction you want to, but it's not the case anymore. And that's, again, this is why, and I really enjoyed it to read that report, because it really shows the struggles of an organization, even if you're not in news, struggles of an organization that has to move. The big point here, I think we've mentioned it a few times in the show, but I'm not sure. It's Christensen, Innovator's Dilemma. It's a very, very, very good book that was written, I think, probably 10 years ago, even more, I think.
80s.
I've read it. Sorry, come again? Go ahead.
In the 80s. It was written in the 80s, yeah.
In the 80s and 90s, maybe you're right. I've read it, I think, 10 years ago, and I've reread it. I'm not going to go into the whole book. We could do actually a show probably one day about the innovator's dilemma, but the point is that with innovation, according to Christensen, innovation, goes instantly, like in waves. He takes examples of the hard drive manufacturers. They make a hard drive that is big and fat, and it was made for mainframe computers, and then suddenly an advancement in technology allows to make smaller hard drives, and these hard drives can also at the same time be linked to the PC revolution, which is not mainframe. Nobody had a mainframe at home, but suddenly people had PCs. And with each of these waves of technology, you have players that disappeared because they were not ready to adapt to a new game. And that's exactly what we're talking about here today. And here is the New York Times. When is your organization ready? It's very hard. Actually, the book, and that's something that I'm not going to say it's a dirty secret, but if you read the book, you see a lot of more failures than actually successes. It is extremely hard to change organization. It's not only about digital. The example I just given you about hard drives, it was more than 40 years ago. The internet was not there. So it's always the same type of dynamic that goes. Your DNA is adapted to one type of era. Your DNA is adapted to one type of product. You're making actually money with a product. How can you prepare yourself to actually pass to the next level? And I think this is also something that Ivan does or tries to do with his client when he talks to them.
This also, and absolutely, and this also connects with the article that we've been talking about. That this is about organizations need to be able to react faster, and this is right now the key of the game. Be able to take action and react. One thing that I think is fantastic is the fact that the New York Times spent the time and the effort on making this report. I don't know if there are many organizations out there that actually do their homework and try to really find out and go deep. And this is something that, again, as you mentioned before, it's not like we're pointing fingers. Actually, it's the opposite. We think that it's great that they have taken the time to really try to understand how to be able to react and how to be able to change in a way that actually will make sense for them. And again, I mean, this is something that it's a transformation, and it's a digital transformation, and this is something that is relevant for every organization. We're focusing right now on news because of the nature of the news. But whether your organization it's an FMCG company or a telecommunications or you are making T-shirts, you really need to embrace this transformation. And this is something that we are going to explore further in future shows.
I want to mention quickly two things, because it's true. I know I've been saying that, but you again say it's true that it's valid for an organization, because most organizations do not realize how much actually information they're selling. When you sell a brand, you sell information. Of course, you sell a product, but you sell information. So don't believe that because you're not the New York Times or you're not a newspaper that you're not sending information. That this will. It's true that content industries, music that we listen to, like we talked with Tommy Darko last week, or here news, were probably the first hit by this transformation of the digital age, because by nature, information itself, so the content is more easily replicable and shareable than, say, a T-shirt. But still, there are very close similarities. And I kept talking about the incumbents, so the traditional companies that are disrupted. An example of the New York Times is, and I know it's very hard to compare these two, but a lot of people talk about BuzzFeed. BuzzFeed.com is a very viral, I don't like the term, but website that they share news, and they package it completely differently. They package it. Does it have as much credibility in the New York Times? Probably not. Does it have a lot of readership and a lot of shares on social media? Yes, a lot. So I'm not saying that one is better than the other. Again, I'm not here making a judgment on the quality of the BuzzFeed versus the New York Times. What I'm trying to say is that BuzzFeed was born in the era ready. It didn't have the legacy of the organization, that DNA I mentioned before, and thus was created a model that is purely made out of the realities of today, whereas the New York Times has to move. But now an example, and I know I don't want to talk too much about it, but there is actually an example in the news industry that I've been researching that has been successful. There are probably others, but I think it's a very interesting case study about how you can transform yourself. It's a company that you probably have never heard about. It's called Schibsted. It's a company based actually in Norway, and they own properties, newspapers in Norway and in Sweden. Actually, they own one of the biggest Swedish newspaper. So they are also an organization that deliver news to your door. So it's very similar to the New York Times. They don't have the scale of the United States, meaning you're talking about Sweden and Norway. We're not just the size of the country has nothing to do with the United States. So, and usually when we talk about digital, we think about scale. So the more scale you have, the more probability of success you might have, because you have a big market into market of margins. But what is interesting about that case study, and I'll put some articles that are very interesting that I found online, and some of them I've researched on the digitalloop.co after the show, is that already back in the 90s, they realized that something was changing. Maybe because they were in a small market. So at some point, they were obviously also maybe smart, but when you're a small market, maybe you're struggling maybe faster in the US. And they started like saying, okay, how do we have to do now? So one of the things they've done, newspapers make money out of classified. And today's classified, when you think about it, where are the classified? eBay and Craigslist. That's mostly when people are looking for stuff. There are properties in each country that are most probably well known. These guys, very early on, and we're talking 95, right? They realized that, okay, something is going on. So they spun out the classified business. So instead of keeping digital within the newspaper, they put it as a separate business unit. You say you'll have your own budget and you make your own decision, because the risk, and that comes with the transformation, the risk when a new trend or a new business is being born within an organization is that it's so small that you don't really care about it until it's too late. And also, and let's say talking about selling advertising or here classified, if you're a salesperson at the beginning, since the business is so small, you don't have an incentive to actually sell on digital. You say, I'm going to keep selling on the print because this is where money is made and I have my relationship. Well, so what they did, they put it as a separate entity. It was completely separated. That became so big that now basically Schibsted, that company I just talked about, is number 3 behind Craigslist and eBay. So it's a huge online classified business. And the digital approach that they're doing for all their newspapers, same, has been growing. Actually, if you remember the names, the number I gave you earlier about how much the New York Times is doing on print versus advertising, basically this news organization I just mentioned now has completely different numbers. They're making a lot more advertising on digital than they do on print. To make a story short, what they did, because the next thing that happened is mobile. they kept the same idea. They said, you know what? We're going to do the same thing. They spun out again. They didn't put mobile within digital. They spun it out again and said, okay, another entity with its own budget, with its own KPIs, with its own responsibilities, with its own people. They won't have to be burdened by the tradition or the DNA of the others. And you know what? Again, they've been successful. Again, they have very interesting initiatives about mobile, and they're actually making a profit with it as well. So it's very interesting to see that it is possible. And this company, I mean, it has hit hurdles as well. They made a lot of investment. They bought out a lot of other companies around Europe. Some of them were great successes, some of them were so-so. A few of them were failures. But and the CEO said, I think it was CEO, the chairman, and I'll quote that because I don't want to look for the quote right now, but he said, there's no silver bullet, there's no one size fits all, but they tried. And you know what? The smartest thing, I think in this whole thing, is that they really, every time, and I know I'm going to repeat myself, but instead of putting a small unit that becomes even bigger, but it still makes no relevance to the business within the current organization, they put it out and they say, okay, you're responsible for your own thing. You don't have to think about how we make money right now. Figure out how we will make money and how you can make money on your own. And you know what? That proved actually successful. So there is a way, even in the news industry, there is a way to actually make maybe probably data-driven possibilities. I know the Guardian has data-driven initiatives called Known. I mean, there are stuff you can do. But probably the key thing here, and I'm not saying it's a one-size-fits-all like that either, but the key thing is probably to kind of try to separate these entities so they're not burdened by the legacy of the current organization. So sorry I went for that rant, but I think it's very interesting as a way to do that digital transformation.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I guess it's time to wrap up.
Yeah, sorry, you're right.
But yeah, I mean, this is something that I definitely believe we will continue focusing on, because this is something that, like I mentioned before, we see time and time again companies struggling to identify to be aware, to identify the way to do it, and to know how to do it, because it's very easy to say you need to change, but it's completely different to implement that change. So, Paul.
Exactly. So I guess, guys, we'll see you next week. Actually, next week. Are we not going to be together at some event, right?
Yes, we are. Both of us. We will be speaking at a huge event in Sofia, Bulgaria,
yep,
called Digitalk. We're gonna try to make see if we can make the recording of the Digital Loop together while we are in Bulgaria. But yeah, next week, Paul and I will be in Bulgaria. So if you're attending Digitalk and if you're going to be there, don't be shy, come and say hi. We love always to talk with people that enjoy the show.
Exactly, and on that bombshell, as Jeremy Clarkson would say, we'll see you next week. Bye-bye. Bye, Ivan.
Bye.